Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something really fascinating and honestly pretty complex. We are going to decode the global tobacco industry, but we're doing it through the ultra-clear structural lens of the Sustainable Industry Classification System, or SICS for short. Whether you're tracking market trends or you're deep into corporate sustainability, understanding exactly how this historically controversial industry is classified, measured, and held accountable is absolutely crucial. So let's just jump right in.
Here's our game plan for today. We'll start by classifying the industry, then we'll map out the global supply chain, move into how we actually measure public health impacts, and finally, we'll look at the strict regulations around marketing practices.
Kicking things off with Section 1, Classifying the Industry and Understanding SICS FBT-TB.
Now, before we get to the tobacco leaf itself, we got to talk about the framework. The SASB standards, which are now managed by the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB, are really the foundation here. The ISSB oversees these highly specific industry-based accounting standards to help investors track sustainability-related financial info. And honestly, this isn't just about corporate PR or looking good on paper. It is about hard structural data that directly impacts a company's bottom line. So where does tobacco actually fit into all of this? Under this system, the industry gets a very specific code, FBTB. And here's a detail that might actually surprise you. This code places tobacco manufacturers squarely within the broader food and beverage sector. Kind of wild, right? So when analysts pull up FBTB, they are evaluating massive global entities making cigarettes, cigars, and smokeless tobacco, but structurally, they're categorized right alongside your everyday food producers. All right, moving to part 2, the global supply chain. Let's follow the leaf. To really get this industry, you have to understand its physical footprint and its business model, which breaks down into 3 main steps. It literally starts in the dirt. Independent farmers grow and harvest the vast majority of the global tobacco crop. Then, step 2, those farmers sell their raw crops either to intermediate tobacco merchants or directly to manufacturers under contract. And then comes step 3, which is where the massive global scale kicks in. Huge multinational entities take over. Their entire business model relies on acquiring and selling exclusive rights to specific brands across highly diverse international markets. Which brings up a pretty big question. Knowing this industry is built on a massive agricultural supply chain that feeds into these giant international brand portfolios, how do we actually measure its sustainability risks?
That brings us to Section 3, Measuring Public Health Impacts, specifically looking at traditional products versus harm reduction. The standard essentially splits the industry's output into 2 distinct buckets. On one side, you've got your traditional combustible products, think standard cigarettes, cigars, pipe tobacco, and biddies. But on the other side, we have non-combustible products. This represents the newer, rapidly growing array of what the industry calls harm reduction products. We're talking e-vapor, heated tobacco devices, and pharmaceutical nicotine replacement therapies like gums and patches.
To track the reality of this industry shift, the SASB standard requires companies to report distinct activity metrics. Just think about how the units of measure change here. For combustible products, they have to report the number of sticks in the millions, or loose leaf by weight in metric tons. But for non-combustibles, the metric completely flips to the number of devices and refill products sold. If you're an analyst, this is exactly the hard math you need to track how fast a company is actually pivoting away from traditional smoking and moving toward new delivery systems. But hey, raw numbers only tell half the story, right? Entities also have to publicly disclose a deep, qualitative assessment of the risks and opportunities tied to these new harm reduction products. They've got to explain the technical hurdles of bringing these devices to market and navigate how consumers perceive their safety, especially as new scientific studies pop up. Plus, they have to weigh the shifting regulatory and reputational risks against the massive market opportunities here, including the potential to actually reduce traditional cigarette smoking. Let's transition into our 4th and final section. Regulating marketing practices, or the cost of influence. When it comes to marketing, the SASB standard doesn't mess around. It hits companies with a very blunt, quantitative metric, the total amount of monetary losses. This tracks the actual financial hits an entity takes during a reporting period, resulting from legal proceedings over how they market, label, or advertise their products. Now, we need to be really precise about what this includes. Crucially, this metric explicitly excludes legal defense fees. So it's not measuring how much a company pays its corporate lawyers. It purely focuses on the actual liabilities paid to opposing parties. Things like fines, civil judgments, regulatory penalties, or criminal restitutions stemming from deceptive claims or misbranded labeling. It isolates the exact hard cost of regulatory violations. Beyond those strict financial penalties, the standard also demands that entities disclose how they align with the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Let's look at Article 11, which is all about packaging and labeling. Under this, entities have to describe their policies on using terms like low tar or mild that might falsely imply reduced harm. They also have to detail how they comply with incredibly strict location-based rules on the size and use of pictorial health warnings, how often those messages are rotated, and the mandatory disclosure of exactly what constituents and emissions are in the product. And that builds directly into Article 13, covering advertising and promotion. And wow, is this comprehensive. Companies must publicly outline their marketing policies for direct ads, so TV, radio, digital, and print, as well as point-of-sale displays in retail stores. But it also goes after indirect promotion. They have to detail their stance on handing out free samples, offering promotional discounts, corporate sponsorships, and even brand stretching, which is when a tobacco brand name is connected to a completely non-tobacco product. The standard basically forces total global transparency on all these fronts. Bringing it all together, we can really see the dual focus of the SASB standard for the tobacco industry. Notice how, for both public health and marketing practices, it pairs hard, quantitative metrics like revenue from non-combustibles and exact monetary legal losses with deep qualitative discussion. It's a really smart structural approach designed to give analysts the complete picture of a company's sustainability profile and regulatory compliance.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We've traced the global supply chain, we've unpacked the SICS SBF-TB metrics, and we've looked at the intense regulatory landscape. But as the industry attempts this massive structural pivot toward non-combustible harm reduction products, will these precise reporting metrics actually be enough to redefine its public impact and secure its financial future? It's a huge, complex question, but thanks to these standards, we finally have the data to watch it unfold. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, everyone. Keep asking the right questions, and I'll see you next time.